To start off with, we're going to have a conversation with two of the research projects. And I'd like to introduce Anna Kadefors from KTH and Stefan Uppenberg from WSP to join me on our chairs. Please make yourself comfortable. And you see, I start off with a comfy chair, and then I'll be on the hard chair. That's how the number of people are going to be growing as we go through this dialogue. So first of all, I think we're going to wait until we've got your slide up on the screen. Anna and Stefan, you're going to be describing something that you've called the Impres project. So what I'd really be interested in understanding is, what is it about? What were you setting out to do? So just tell me a little bit about the project, please.
Well, we've heard the word procurement here today a number of times. And we know that procurement is often perceived as kind of a very strong driver for driving development in various sustainability areas, in construction and other areas as well. So this project is focused on how procurement requirements are used to drive carbon reduction in infrastructure worldwide. And our goal, one of our prime goals, is to identify models and practices that can be shared across countries in this area. And what's important here is that it is an industry-academia collaboration. So we have universities, Lund University, KTH, where I come from, WSP and Skanska. And this project also is part of the Proxibe program, which is a national research program on procurement in the built environment more generally in Sweden. And if we look at what we've done, the project is based on case studies, where we perform interviews with various actors, as many as possible that we have managed to engage in the supply chain. And we ask them about how have these projects designed their procurement requirements, how have they been implemented, which are their experiences, how have they used the sustainability assessment systems. And to understand the background of this, we also mapped the carbon policy context in each country, because they can't be understood just independently. And as you see, we have a goal to produce both scientific and practitioner-oriented outcomes and deliverables in the project.
Okay, so you started in September 2016, you're coming to your conclusions, you've done your interviews with, 11 different case studies, yeah? So what have you found? What's interesting? What's the highlights?
Well, we can't really give you the final results yet, because we're still in the analysis phase. We have just recently finished the interviews. But here you see I tried to put together a table for comparison for some preliminary project results. I would like to stress the preliminary. It's not final for some of the aspects that we'll be looking at. And this is for one project per country that we looked at. And without going into details in this table, I would firstly like to say that, as we discussed quite a lot here, we see that quite a lot is in place now regarding policy, carbon policy and the context for this, and also on executive level. There's a lot of decisions. This might have been, it has been driven by a few dedicated individuals in projects earlier, but now in many cases there's a framework in place that would be hard to back off from in the next project. So that is one thing. And we also see that there are a lot of ways trying to procure low carbon solutions. There are functional requirements saying reduce this and do it the way any way you like, and there are specific requirements for specific materials and so on. And there's also a lot of tools available for calculation and for carbon footprinting and for evaluating performance and so on. But it's still quite early on actually, and we see that in many projects there's a lot of calculation and struggling with baselining, finding the right baseline, rebaselining, And how should we do this is a question about the specifics. Okay, we can calculate it, but what do we do to really reduce? And there's a lot of good things done in these projects. We have discussed here optimization, minimization of resource use, and reuse of excavated materials, and to some extent also cement clinker replacements and such. But when we ask in the projects, in many cases they say, well, we would probably have been doing this anyway because of the cost reduction. So in many cases, this is carbon measures, mitigation measures done, but probably driven by cost reduction and included in the calculations and so on. So we don't see very many innovative solutions really still yet, and we think that it might be too high expectations on functional requirements to drive innovation, letting this feel free for contractors to invent new things or reducing carbon just by requiring it. So it could be a problem. But we also see some innovative solutions like Anglian Water. I think it's a good example of finding a new way to collaborate with the supply chain. They have 15-year perspective in there, and they are doing this development above the project level. Driving the innovation, the development of low carbon solutions. So that's also a very interesting solution.
So there are some positives.
Yes, there are. And there are many positives.
Yeah,
but
I know,
we're not.
but
But transformative solutions, we're not there.
No, and that is worrying, isn't it? I mean, when you think about what we've been talking about, and particularly on the back of that last session, where we're thinking, well, how do you stimulate innovation? Anna, from your perspective, you're a researcher with a great deal of expertise around procurement requirements. How do we change the procurement model, or from your view, what's required to get that transformational change that we need?
Well, when we look at this with a background where we have studied procurement in many aspects of procurement. In my case, primarily collaborative procurement. But we do not only study the most successful cases. So when I see the problems that we see here in these with all this work on rebaselining, etc. I can see that there are similarities, because we can see that there is a lot of experimentation with new procurement models in general, and there are often high expectations on these on what you can achieve in terms of innovation. And
so where,
in this case,
where is that happening though? Because it's not happening in those projects, apart from the one example in the UK, or maybe that's being harsh. So if you're saying it's happening, where is it happening?
Where is what happening?
The testing of the new procurement models and doing things differently.
Well, new procurement models are tested everywhere when a project manager has an idea about testing a new procurement model. But what we see is that you often introduce incentives without being fully aware of the requirements, for example, for management resources to kind of get the full effect of these incentives. You also often get other side effects of incentives that you haven't kind of counted with. So we think that you should have you should think more before introducing sharp contractual incentives. You should focus on establishing collaboration, but you also need to know that procurement is necessary. Good procurement requirements is necessary, but it's not enough. You need to benchmark more and know more about, firstly, the how, which you can't back away from that when you design your procurement model. You need to have some idea what changes do we want to see in the process, and how do we make those changes happen. Second is that you need also to look at your own resources as a client, so that you have the capacity and the resources to follow the supply chain. You see with Anglian Water, for example, it's not just the procurement requirement and then the client walks away. It's a very strong commitment.
I was wanting
throughout.
just to touch on that
Yeah.
a little bit, because belligerence was a word we heard right at the beginning, and being, what that means is you hold strong to what you want to see happen, and you challenge when it doesn't happen and you don't accept it. So how can you? Is it the client leadership that really needs to take that responsibility and then delegate it effectively through that procurement system? Is that the magic? Is that where it starts from your experience and what you've done with your research?
My own reflections, I'm not an expert here, so I don't know, but I think there's other things needed to complement the procurement requirements. I think the procurement requirements can be useful for establishing a way of working, and this is the way we do, but I think we need to see more like, for example, like some sort of alliances or more long-term collaborations concerning innovative, transformative, low-carbon solutions. For example, for a set of bridges, for like if Trafikverket puts out this is a packet of 20 bridges that we will build for the next 15 years. How can we collaborate without procuring those bridges? How can we do this? Putting up common goals and such things. I don't know how it would be designed, but I think there's some other thing apart from procurement that is needed on a
Okay, and will that come out in some of your findings? Because we've got to conclude here.
We'll see. It's a cliffhanger.
Right.
Yeah.
And very briefly, could we, from the basis of this and everything else, could we design an ecosystem of procurement options which will generate and drive low carbon outcomes as well as other benefits? Could we do this? Is that work in progress? How do we find out more about the Impres project? Don't answer. Show the slide, because it's time to go. I'm so sorry. I've got to give myself a red card. We'll have to push on. But I'd really like to know those questions, and maybe we could do that later. So people can find and follow the project.
Yeah.
And it will be open source at the end of December. People can use the materials.
I can say that the Proxiba website is being reconstructed, not in English yet, but soon.
Okay, so we'll all, for us Brits and others, the Dutch included, we're all going to be looking at a translator for that. But never mind, that's fantastic. Thank you ever so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.